I was 16 last year, and my friend Leon and I were hanging out a few days before Halloween. We were talking about what we wanted to do. We felt too old to go trick-or-treating, but we also still wanted to do something fun for the holiday. We thought up a few ideas, most of which were quickly discarded. Then I had a different idea. I reminded Leon about the abandoned farm we both knew about and suggested we explore it. It would be creepy and thrilling, which is exactly what we wanted for Halloween. Compared to our other ideas, this one was the best by a long shot. Leon was excited about it too, but we both agreed that other people would probably have the same idea to go on October 31st. So, instead, we chose to go on the night before. We didn't want to risk running into anyone crazy at an abandoned place like that. We just wanted to explore and maybe be a little spooked, then leave, which sounded harmless. On the 30th, Leon drove us out to the neighborhood it was near and parked on the road. We got out and walked through the neighborhood until we reached the street that turned into a gravel path leading to the farm. I had only ever seen the place during the day, and it was pretty much just a large field of grass with a typical wooden barn and a single-story home. From the edge of the path, neither structure was visible, and our flashlights only lit up a few feet ahead as we started making our way down the gravel driveway. As we got closer, we could see the outline of the barn on the left side and the house further back at the end of the driveway. We were more interested in the house, thinking the barn was probably completely empty and not very exciting. We kept walking and got to a clearing of tall grass. It was like a circle of dirt and short grass that went around the perimeter of the house. As we approached the front, we passed by some large farming equipment, old tractor-like things that had been left out for years. Even with our dim flashlights, we could see that they were engulfed in rust. When we got up to the porch, it looked like the door had been replaced by a solid wooden board. We walked around the whole outside of the house, and every window and door was sealed and covered. Disappointed, we went back to the front of the house and tried to think of something else. As we stood there, we saw the path going up to the barn. It wasn't an actual path, just a line of flattened grass. With nothing else to do, we started heading for the barn. Something felt different as we approached it compared to when we approached the house. It was just an uneasy feeling that grew as we got closer. When we reached it, the large barn door was already wide open. I walked in first, and Leon followed behind, both of us shining our flashlights around as we entered. It only took a couple of seconds for a horrible smell to hit us. But it was a barn, so it wasn't surprising. Then we noticed something else, footprints all over the ground, not what you'd expect from other kids exploring the place. They all went in a line back and forth from a single point on the other side of the barn. I saw in Leon's eyes that he was just as freaked out as I was, but that was the goal of going there in the first place. We slowly walked in line with the footprints leading to a wooden cellar hatch that blended in with the floor. The only noticeable thing, other than the clear footsteps leading to it, was a shiny new padlock that held the hatch shut. Before we could really think about it, a sudden thud shook the whole barn. We turned around, seeing the door had been shut behind us. Leon sprinted over and shoved the door back open, and both of us looked around, but we didn't see anyone. Now terrified, we sprinted straight through the tall grass back to the gravel driveway and booked it to the neighborhood where the car was. We definitely got the scare we were looking for, maybe even too much. Neither of us ever tried to figure out what really happened that night, but a couple of months later, we saw that the whole house and barn had been blocked off. We tried to look up why, but there was no public word about it. What was going on there remains a mystery. But I think if we had stayed to find out, we may have never left. It was the fall of 2018 when this happened to me. I was 22, living temporarily on the East Coast, right outside of the Appalachian mountain range. I'll admit I've never been too much of an outdoorsy person and hadn't had any experience in camping or anything. Nor was I really that interested in those sorts of activities. However, this was my last year living in probably the best place to do all those outdoor things, especially with it being mid-fall and the trees looking pretty and the weather being nice. I figured this was my chance to try it out. I didn't want to go for a huge camping adventure or anything, so I found a simple hiking trail that had some good views of the mountains. I packed a small backpack with water, snacks, and a first aid kit. No cars were there, though. It was just a small dirt parking area, so it wasn't as popular as I thought. I parked and started walking. It was calm, and it definitely didn't feel like a path a lot of people would take. There were no noticeable recent shoe prints in the dirt. It was just a fairly small path with trees on either side. As I got further in, the entire path became more densely covered in trees, enough to block out a lot of the sun and make the whole trail shaded. It was actually really nice and cooling, but not hearing or seeing anyone else became more unsettling the further I got. Not in a creepy way, but just that I was entirely alone. It wasn't something I was used to. About an hour or maybe even 2 hours down the trail, I was caught off guard by seeing a man ahead of me. He was sitting on the side, looking like he was just taking a break under one of the trees. As I passed him, I gave a friendly nod and said hi, to which he looked up at me and said nothing. He didn't smile or nod. He just looked at me for a few seconds. Then I looked away. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe he didn't hear me, or maybe I caught him off guard as well. But the strange look, without even a slight smile, wasn't giving me a good feeling. I walked a bit faster for the next part of the trail, hoping to put some distance between us. After about an hour, I slowed down and made it to the end, which was an overlook of the mountains. The fall colors on the trees made the view even better than it probably would have been at any other time of the year, and overall, I was glad to have made the hike. I stared off into the distance for a few minutes, enjoying the view that I almost never got to see. But when I turned around to leave, my heart almost left my body when I saw the man from earlier standing right at the entrance to the trail. He was maybe 10 feet from me, and I never heard him walking up. After the initial scare, I realized how creepy it was that he was just standing there and not coming up to look out at the overlook like a normal person would be doing. But then he did something even more odd. His face shifted as he smiled and said hi, asking me how the view was. "Yeah, it's really nice. You should take a look too," I responded, trying to be polite but still really confused. The man stepped closer, then pointed to my right and said there was an even better view down that trail. I looked over my shoulder to where he was pointing. There was a path barely visible, going through the dense trees, rugged and undefined, not something that looked to be used very often. The man walked up to where the path started and stood at the entrance, telling me again about how great the view was and saying it was just a minute or two to walk there. I politely declined, but he continued to tell me about how great it was, to the point where it was obvious that he had other intentions than just wanting me to go there and see a nice view. I said I was okay and had to get home, then started to walk toward the main trail. But the man was quick to move his body in front of it. I stopped in place, now even more terrified and thinking of the possible intentions of this man, who was just a few feet from me in the middle of an empty forest. The man looked at me with a blank expression. I took a few steps, walking around him and just hoping that nothing would escalate. For some miraculous reason, it didn't. The man watched me as I made my way around him and down the trail. Every time I looked back, he was still watching me, not even trying to be discreet. Thankfully, he didn't follow, and I made it back to my car. I don't know what that man was trying to do, but it was almost surely not anything good. What was down that path likely was just a dead end somewhere for him to lead me before doing whatever horrible thing he had in mind. I don't know why he didn't stop me from leaving either. Maybe he was worried about doing something on the main trail. All I can say is that I'm lucky to have gotten out before something else happened. During October in our town, there's always a place that opens up with a bunch of fall and Halloween-related things to do. It's a huge fair that's set up on a farm. I'd been there a couple of times with my family when I was younger, but this was my first time going alone with just friends. We were in high school and thought it'd be fun to walk around and enjoy the Halloween vibes. The place was open late the whole week leading to Halloween, so we went on one of those weekday nights around 8 p.m. We arrived, but there weren't many people around. Most of the families had already left, and there were only a few groups of kids our age still running around. Regardless, we had fun. We played some of the random games they had set up and messed around a bit. Then one of my friends suggested that we check out the corn maze. None of us hesitated to run in and try to get as lost as possible, but we split into two groups. 3 of them went one way, and I was left with my buddy Micah. We started exploring for a few minutes, but then we decided to find our way out. During the 10 or so minutes we spent walking around, we never heard or ran into any of the others from our group. This made us wonder how big the maze actually was. At some point, we were getting tired of it and started trying to find our way out. When we reached a random crossroads, Micah didn't come back. I waited for a long time, at least 2 or 3 minutes, without hearing or seeing him. Then I heard footsteps coming from down the path. As I waited for Micah to reappear, something about the footsteps didn't seem right. A moment later, a large man came around the path and walked up to me. He was wearing farmer-type clothes like overalls, a flannel shirt, and boots, looking like all the other employees at the fair. He said it was closing for the night and that he would take me out of the maze. I told him my friends were in there as well, and he said he'd already shown them out, which made everything else make sense. Now, I followed him, going around multiple turns and corners. But strangely, the sound of the fair started to get quieter and quieter until I couldn't hear it at all. It was just me and this man walking through a dead silent corn maze. Then, we reached a dead end. I stopped and watched the man pull aside the corn and start pushing his way through it, urging me to come through. I did as he said, walking through it and following close behind him until the corn abruptly stopped, turning into an empty field. As I looked around, I realized this was the other side of the cornfield, opposite the town and fair. Right in front of me was a car parked in the grass, with its engine running and headlights off. My breathing became shallow, and my heart rate started increasing. All of a sudden, the man quickly turned around, tried to grab me, but I managed to react fast enough, moving away and running back into the maze. As I sprinted back onto the path, I heard the man forcing his way through the corn again and following right behind me. I started going straight through all of it, trying to get back to the fair, where hopefully someone could help me. This seemed to work, as the man never caught up to me. When I made it out, my whole friend group was standing at the entrance, waiting for me. It's not really clear what happened, but Micah said he came back for me, and I was gone. None of them saw the man, and they almost didn't believe me until I called the cops. All they found were tire tracks in the grass, no car or man anywhere.